O heavenly King, comfort of the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasure of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity. Save our souls, O good one. Amen. I think we're on chapter 49 of step 15.
In judging delights felt by us during psalmody, let us examine, ponder, and observe what comes to us from the demon of fornication, and what comes from the words of the Spirit and from the grace and power contained in them. Do not be ignorant of yourself, young man. I have seen men pray with all their soul for their loved ones, who in reality were moved by the spirit of fornication, while believing that they were fulfilling the law of love. Touch alone is sufficient for bodily defilement, for nothing is so dangerous as this sense. Remember him who wrapped his hand in his cassock when about to carry his sick mother, and deaden your hand to natural or unnatural things, whether your own or another's body. I think that one ought not to call anyone a saint in any real sense until he has transformed this earth into holiness, if such a transformation is even possible. When we are lying in bed, let us be especially sober and vigilant, because then our mind struggles with the demons without our body, and if it is sensual, it readily becomes a traitor. Always let the remembrance of death and the prayer of Jesus, said as a monologue, go to sleep with you and get up with you. For you will find nothing to equal these aids during sleep.
Okay. Your text said as a monologue?
Yes, Vladyka.
Okay. What that means, it's a Greek term referring to a single phrase. So the prayer of Jesus, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, or the long form, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner, is said as a kind of a single thought, a single phrase, which is what that means.
Some think that battles and emissions during sleep come only from food, but I have observed that people who are seriously ill and the strictest fasters are very prone to these pollutions. I once asked one of the most experienced and distinguished monks about this, and the blessed man explained it to me very clearly. Emissions during sleep, said that ever-memorable man, come from the abundance of food and from a life of ease. They also come from contempt, when we pride ourselves that we have not been subject to these effluxes for a long time. And also they come from judging our neighbor. The last cases, he added, can happen even to the sick. But perhaps all three can. But if anyone is unable to find any of these reasons in himself, then he is indeed blessed to be so free from passion. And if this happens to him, then it comes solely from the envy of the demons, and God allows it for a time in order that, after a sinless mishap, he may obtain the most sublime humility. Let no one get into the habit of thinking over during the daytime the fantasies that have occurred to him during sleep. For the aim of the demons in prompting this is to defile us while we are awake by making us think about our dreams. Let us listen again to another wile of our foes. Just as food bad for the body produces sickness after a time or some days, so this often happens in the case of actions which defile the soul. I have seen some give way to luxury and not at once feel the attacks of the enemy. I have seen others eat with women and converse with them, and at the time have no bad thoughts whatsoever in their minds. They were thus deceived and encouraged to grow careless and to think that they were in peace and safety, and they suddenly suffered destruction in their cells. But what bodily and spiritual destruction comes to us when we are alone? He who is tempted knows, and he who is not tempted does not need to know. On these occasions, the best aids for us are sackcloth, ashes, all-night standing, hunger, moistening the tongue, and moderation when parched with thirst, dwelling amongst the tombs, and above all, humility of heart. And if possible, a spiritual father or a careful brother, an elder in spirit to help us. But I shall be surprised if anyone will be able to save his ship from the sea by himself. One and the same sin often incurs a condemnation 100 times greater for one person than for another, according to character, place, progress, and a good deal else. Someone told me of an extraordinarily high degree of purity. He said, a certain man, on seeing a beautiful body, thereupon glorified the Creator, and from that one look he was moved to the love of God and to a fountain of tears. And it was wonderful to see how what would have been a cause of destruction for one was for another the supernatural cause of a crown. If such a person always feels and behaves in the same way on similar occasions, then he has risen immortal before the general resurrection. Let us be guided by the same rule in singing melodies and songs. For lovers of God are moved to holy gaiety, to divine love and to tears both by worldly and by spiritual songs, but lovers of pleasure to the opposite. As we have said before, some people in hermitages suffer far more severe attacks from the enemies, and no wonder. For the demons haunt such places, since the Lord in his care for our salvation has driven them into the deserts and the abyss of hell. Demons of fornication cruelly assail the solitary in order to drive him back into the world, as having received no benefit from the desert. Demons keep away from us when we are living in the world, that we may go on staying among worldly-minded people because we are not attacked there. Hence we should realize the place in which we are attacked is the one in which we are certainly waging bitter war on the enemy. For if we ourselves are not waging war, the enemy is presenting himself as our friend. When we are in the world for some justifiable reason, we are protected by the hand of God, perhaps through the prayer of our spiritual Father, that the Lord may not be blasphemed through us. And sometimes we are protected through our insensitivity and through having had long experience of the sights of the world and its subjects of conversation and all its doings. And sometimes it is because the demons go away of their own accord and leave us only the demon of conceit, which takes the place of all the rest. Here yet another trick and villainy of that deceiver, all you who wish to be confirmed in purity, and look out for it. One who had experience of this craftiness told me that the demon of sensuality very often hid himself completely, and while a monk was sitting or conversing with women, he would suggest to him extreme piety, and perhaps even a fountain of tears, and would put into his mind the thought of instructing them on the remembrance of death, judgment, and chastity. Then the poor women, being deceived by his speech and false piety, would run to this wolf as to his shepherd, and when at last acquaintance ripened into familiarity, the unfortunate monk would suffer a fall. Let us by every means in our power avoid either seeing or hearing of that fruit which we have vowed not to taste. For it is absurd to think ourselves stronger than the prophet David. That is impossible. Purity is worthy of such great and high praise that certain of the fathers ventured to call it freedom from passion. Some say that those who have tasted sin cannot be called pure. In refutation of this view, I would say, if anyone is willing, it is possible and easy to graft a good olive onto a wild olive. And if the keys of heaven had been entrusted to one who had always lived in a state of virginity, then perhaps the teaching of those who maintain what I have quoted above would be right. But let them be put to shame by him who had a mother-in-law, and having become pure, received the keys of the kingdom. The snake of sensuality is many-faced. In those who are inexperienced in sin, he sows the thought of making one trial and then stopping. But this crafty creature incites those who have tried this to fresh trial through the remembrance of their sin. Many inexperienced people feel no conflict in themselves simply because they do not know what is bad, and the experience because they know this abomination suffer disquiet and struggle. But the opposite of this also happens. When we rise from sleep in a good and peaceful mood, we are being secretly encouraged by the holy angels, especially if we went to sleep with much prayer and watching. But sometimes we rise from sleep in a bad mood, and this is a result of evil dreams and visions. I have seen the wicked highly exalted and towering aloft and foaming and raging at me like the cedars of Lebanon. And I passed by with temperance, and lo, his fury was not as before. And I humbled my thought and sought him out, and his place could not be found in me, not a trace of it. This is a quotation from Psalm 35. He who has conquered his body has conquered nature, and he who has conquered nature has certainly risen above nature. And he who has done this is little, if at all, lower than the angels.
Okay, does anybody have any questions?
What does graft mean? Graft? It was talking about olive trees and stuff.
Oh, that's that's when you take a root stock, like the base of the plant, and then you put another one on it and you kind of put them together. This is very basic, and then you can grow one that's the same tree as the base, like the apples. That's how you propagate apples a lot.
Oh, okay.
You just kind of connect them together.
You cut the branch of one. Both. and you fit them together like a puzzle piece.
Oh.
And then they grow together, and then they grow from there. And
I know that, yeah.
the base of the tree brings, the top of
The
it gets some
water.
of the stuff from the bottom, and even some of the same,
So you can have two different kinds of cherries growing on the
Right.
same
Oh, okay. Cool. Thanks.
tree.
I can tell you're a city boy, huh?
Yeah. Boy.
So what else? What other questions? I think it's really important to point out, how central the virtue of purity is. And not just for monks, but for everybody. And that purity of heart, it's not just freedom from sexual thoughts, it's that purity of heart is ultimately freedom from all thoughts, and from all sinful motivations, it's ultimately freedom from all selfishness. And so for one who has that kind of purity, which he says is next to dispassion itself, it's the ability to be completely undisturbed by provocations that come from the situation around.
So a lot is talked about with sleep when we sleep. So my question with that is, are we more prone or more open to attacks or suggestions when we're sleeping? No matter who we are, no matter what level of whatever faith we are we more prone to
Sure.
things?
Yeah,
Okay.
because we have dreams which we can't control.
And these dreams are not necessarily dreams, but possibly real confrontations from.
Well, sometimes, but most often, I mean, there are demonic dreams,
Okay.
very definitely.
But
And
this
some-
is more so about not that as much.
well, the demons can suggest all sorts of things,
Okay.
and but generally we blame the devil too much.
Okay, I see where you're going with that.
We don't take enough responsibility for our own actions.
Okay.
And, and the thing is, if our mind is, and just being in this culture, our mind is steeped in all of this violent, pornographic, judgmental, all this avaricious stuff, of course it's going to get processed through our dreams.
Okay.
And sometimes those dreams have a physical manifestation.
So you say most of that is on us and it's not coming directly from, because I was getting some of that from, they were suggesting that it was like we were open to these things from directly coming from demons. But you're saying.
Well, some of it is, and some of it's from our memories.
Most of it is us. Okay.
Yeah. If you live in an environment like a monastery in which there's very little to provoke the passions,
Okay.
that's one thing. But if you live in a situation, if you live in the world where people walking around half naked and everything is, it's all about money and wealth and all of this other, and all about selfishness, all about me. So it's going to be, that's going to provoke all sorts of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can't the enemy also use our memories against us? Because then if you see something, but it doesn't mean you see something because you see something, but then the enemy uses that against you, just because your location and what you're surrounded by.
Well,
And then like you want to forget something, but you can't.
right,
The enemy keeps bringing it back up. It's like
exactly.
exacerbating the wound, essentially.
Yep,
That's what I mean, using our memories against us.
yep. And everything we've ever seen is in our memory. Every image.
But that's also a good thing.
It can be.
Fill yourself with good things.
Yeah, if we fill ourselves with good things, but very often we don't. So,
my mom says, garbage in, garbage out.
so,
Programmers.
yeah. So what else?
Well, I was just curious, can you go over that, what Psalm was that, 35?
36.
That
excuse
struck me. Can you go over that again? That like really hit me when I've never heard that song before.
So the 70th verse. I have seen the wicked highly exalted and towering aloft and foaming and raging in me like the cedars of Lebanon. And I passed by with temperance, and lo, his fury was not as before. And I humbled my thought and sought him out, and his place could not be found in me, not a trace of it. It's like not reacting to see wickedness exalted.
There was another part that I had heard. That maybe I was confusing the
Oh,
song.
maybe.
The part of the verse was, "He who has conquered his body has conquered nature." Was that part?
That's the next one.
That's not a quote, but that's.
Oh, okay, okay.
It alludes to Psalm 8, verse 6.
That's the one that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, it alludes to Psalm 8, verse 6.
It's about he who has done this is a little lower than the angels.
Okay.
Remember, in also that verse is cited in Hebrews. That Christ became a little lower. By the incarnation, Christ became a little lower than the angels. In other words, taking our humanity, but by deifying our humanity, he raised even our humanity above the angels. So, essentially what he's doing is making the connection between our salvation, in other words, the deification of our whole being, of our bodies even, with becoming like an angel. And the monastic life is referred to as the angelic life. Anything else? Okay.
For the good Lord shows his great care for us, in that the shamelessness of the feminine sex is checked by shyness as with a sort of bit. For if the woman were to run after the man, no flesh would be saved. In the rulings made by the fathers, a distinction is drawn between different things, such as attraction, or intercourse, or consent, or captivity, or struggle, or so-called passion in the soul. And these blessed men define attraction as a simple conception, or an image of something encountered for the first time, which is lodged in the heart. Intercourse is conversation with what has presented itself, accompanied by passion or dispassion. And consent is the bending of the soul to what has been presented to it, accompanied by delight. Captivity is a forcible and involuntary rape of the heart, or a permanent association with what has been encountered, which destroys the good order of our condition. Struggle, according to their definition, is power equal to the attacking force, which is either victorious or else suffers defeat, according to the soul's desire. And they define passion in a special sense as that which lurks disquietingly in the soul for a long time. And through its intimacy with the soul brings it finally to what amounts to a habit, a self-incurred, downright desertion. Of all these states, the first is without sin, the second not always, while the third is sinful or sinless according to the state of the contestant. Struggle is the occasion of crowns or punishments. Captivity is judged differently, according to whether it occurs at the time of prayer or at other times. It is judged one way in matters of little importance, and in another way in the case of evil thoughts. But passion is unequivocally condemned in every case, and demands either corresponding repentance or future correction. Therefore, he who regards the first attraction dispassionately cuts off with a single blow all the rest which follow.
Okay. So this paragraph, this chapter, basically deals with thoughts, the nature of thoughts, and how thoughts progress from an initial provocation all the way to an action, this is very valuable to understand because the whole point of watchfulness is to be able to see how a thought works in our mind, so that hopefully, if it's a sinful thought, we can cut it off and let it go, but that we can also see how it creates a reaction within us. And because ultimately, to a great degree, this book is about how coming to dispassion. And dispassion means non-reaction, essentially. It doesn't mean that you're emotionally flat. It just means you can control yourself, and you control yourself on a deep level. And so, it's a great echo chamber. Magnifies everything. So, dispassion is the goal. In other words, so we can have a life of profound inner peace, and not being manipulated by our thoughts. And so this process, I like the vocabulary in this translation a little better. The first thing is assault. In other places it's called a provocation. So it's that image that we just see by chance, or that, you know, a word that comes, you know, that we hear, or, you know, something, or a memory that comes to our mind. But it's something that, well, as it says here, a simple conception or an image of something encountered for the first time, which has entered the heart. In other words, that we're somehow attracted to, it's caught our attention, and it enters into the heart. Not so much the nous, but into the depths of our awareness. Converse, I think they call it intercourse there. Converse is conversation with what has presented itself, accompanied by passion or dispassion. In other words, it's when we take that thought which we've been attracted to, and we decide to think about it. Am I going to think about this, or am I going to just let it go? This is the level of that's barely conscious, because it's that kind of split-second decision as to whether, yeah, I'm gonna indulge this, or just let it go. And we do this constantly. And probably 95% of the thoughts that come into our mind, we decide to let go. But converse is when essentially we're kind of looking at it, and it's this, at this stage, is if we have a habitual reaction to that kind of a thought, that habit is a passion. So, like I like to use the example of a McDonald's hamburger. If you love McDonald's hamburgers, and you can't live without it, and here you've been off in this monastery in the wilderness, and you're starving to death because all they had is bread and lentils, and you hear the ad for a McDonald's hamburger, and that's the assault. And so converse with it is it really grabs your attention, and already your habitual reaction, you can see it, you can taste it, you're salivating, you're all ready to go and grab that hamburger, right? And consent, and that's all passion. And if you're dispassionate regarding it, so you hate McDonald's hamburgers, you're not. It might be a catchy tune in the ad, but you're not even going to pay attention because you hate McDonald's hamburgers, or you hate McDonald's or something corporate or whatever. And it says consent is the bending of the soul to what has been presented to it, accompanied by delight. Now, you can think about that. If you're really hungry and you kind of take delight in the idea, right? And but then captivity. Then from having done this and having, in other words, having given yourself over to this thought and thinking about it and taking delight in it, it says this is captivity. It's a forcible and involuntary rape of the heart, or a permanent association with what has been encountered, which destroys the good order of our condition. In other words, you'd give your soul for that hamburger, which is not exactly a very monastic attitude, right? That's kind of a rape of the heart, or a permanent association, which destroys the good order of our condition. Well, if, using the usual example, if you go swipe the car and go rocketing down the mountain to the McDonald's, which is only 45 miles away, you're in total captivity to that thought, right? Struggle is the next stage. According to their definition, in other words, the Fathers, is power equal to the attacking force, which is either victorious or else suffers defeat according to the soul's desire. So, in order to defeat that thought, you have to do some really heavy struggling in order to completely put it out of your mind. But if you don't want to struggle and you really have given yourself over to that you need to gratify that lust for a McDonald's hamburger, and you're rocketing down the mountain at 70 miles an hour, missing cows and deer, and then you're totally in the grip of passion. So it says struggle according to their definition is power equal to the attacking force, which is either victorious or else suffers defeat according to the soul's desire. Well, if you're in that grip of passion, you've suffered defeat. Passion, they say, is preeminently that which for a long time nestles with persistence in the soul, forming therein a habit, as it were, by the soul's long-standing association with it, since the soul of its own free and proper choice clings to it. In other words, you define yourself as one who loves McDonald's hamburgers. The poster child for McDonald's, So the first state is without sin, the provocation or the assault, because it's involuntary. The second stage is not always, but the third stage, converse, it may or may not be sinful. But the third stage, consent, is either sinful or sinless. According to the state of the contestant. In other words, what you do with that thought, and whether you overcome it or whether you allow yourself to fall prey to it, determines whether or not you are going to be held guilty of that passion. Struggle is the occasion of crowns or punishments, and captivity is judged differently according to whether it occurs at the time of prayer or at other times, whether in things indifferent, neither good nor bad, or in the case of evil thoughts. But passion is unequivocally condemned in every case and demands either corresponding repentance or future punishment. Therefore, he who regards the first assault dispassionately cuts off at a single blow all the rest which follow. In other words, the point is to be watchful and don't let thoughts get into you which will lead you down the garden road to sin. Does this make sense? Okay.
Amongst the more precise and discerning fathers, there is mention of a still more subtle notion, something which some of them call a flick of the mind. This is its characteristic. Without passage of time, without word or image, it instantaneously introduces the passion to the victim. There is nothing swifter than this in the material world or more indiscernible in the spiritual. It manifests itself in the soul by simple remembrance with which the soul has no time to dally, since it is independent of time, unconnected with any image, impervious to analysis, in some cases even unknown to the person himself. If anyone, therefore, with the help of mourning, has been able to detect such a subtlety, he can explain to us how it is possible for his soul, by the eye alone, by a mere glance, or the touch of the hand, or the hearing of a song, without any notion or thought, to commit a definite sin of impurity. Some say that it is from thoughts of fornication that passions invade the body. But some affirm, on the contrary, that it is from the feeling of the body that evil thoughts are born. The former say that if the mind has not gone before, the body would not have followed after. And the latter adduce that the malice of bodily passion is in justification of their view, saying that often bad thoughts manage to enter into the heart as the result of a pleasant sight, or the touch of a hand, or the smell of perfume, or hearing sweet voices. If anyone can do so in the Lord, let him explain this. For knowledge of this sort is extremely necessary and profitable for those living the active life scientifically. For those practicing virtue and simplicity of heart, this is not of the least importance. For not all have knowledge, but neither have all the blessed simplicity which is the breastplate against the wiles of evil spirits. Some passions pass to the body from the soul, and some do the opposite. The latter happens to people living in the world, but the former to those living the monastic life, because of the lack of outward stimulus. But about this will I only say, thou shalt seek wisdom among evil men, and shalt not find it. When we have struggled much with this demon, the partner of filth, and driven it out of our heart, torturing it with the stone of fasting and the sword of humility, and this wretch, like some kind of worm, hides itself in our body and endeavors to defile us, tickling us into senseless and untimely movements. It is those who are subject to the demon of arrogance who especially suffer in this way, because as their hearts are no longer continually occupied with impure thoughts, they are prone to the passion of pride. And in order to be convinced of the truth of what has been said, when they have achieved a certain measure of holy quiet, let them discreetly examine themselves. Then they will certainly find that some thought is concealed in the depth of their heart like a snake in dung, suggesting to them that they have made some progress in purity of heart by their own effort and zeal. Poor wretches, they do not think of what was said. What is thou that thou didst not receive as a free gift, either from God or by the cooperation and prayers of others? And so let them look to their own affairs, and let them cast out of their heart with all speed the snake mentioned above, killing it by much humility, so that when they have got rid of it, they may in time be stripped of their clothing of skin, and as chaste children sing to the Lord the triumph song of purity. If only, when they are stripped, they do not find themselves naked of that humility and freedom from malice, which is natural to children. This demon, much more than any other, watches for critical moments. When we are physically unable to pray against it, then the unholy creature launches a special attack against us. Those who have not yet obtained true prayer of the heart can find help in violence and bodily prayer. I mean stretching out the hands, beating the breast, sincere raising of the eyes to heaven, deep sighing, frequent prostrations. But often they cannot do this owing to the presence of other people, and so the demons especially choose to attack them just at this very time. Because we have not yet the strength to resist them by firmness of mind and the invisible power of prayer, we yield to our enemies. If possible, go apart for a brief space. Hide for a while in some secret place. Raise on high the eyes of your soul if you can, but if not, your bodily eyes. Hold your arms motionless in the form of a cross, in order to shame and conquer your Amalek by this sign. Cry to him who is mighty to save us. using no subtle expressions but humble speech, preferably making this your prelude. Have mercy on me, for I am weak. Then you will know by experience the power of the Most High, and with invisible help you will invisibly drive away the invisible ones. He who accustoms himself to wage war in this way will soon be able to put his enemies to flight, solely by spiritual means, for the latter is a recompense from God to doers of the former, and rightly.
Okay. So this whole last couple paragraphs on arrogance or conceit is very important, because so often, especially when we're new to the spiritual life, we think that we achieve something by our own efforts, and that all we're doing is prepping ourselves. We're digging a hole to fall into. So, and very easy to do. You know, we take it to ourselves and think that I did this. So, yeah.
I was thinking, if by digging a hole that you can fall into, that reminds me of a foxhole, if you didn't fall into that hole, could there be some larger pit coming? So that by falling into that, by falling into that pit.
No, this is not a foxhole. This is digging a hole in the street that you forget about and walk into.
Or what you're really describing is falling into resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Like Joseph being turned into resistance.
Yeah. So,
I have a question.
sure.
So all these things, like all these sudden memories and cravings that we get here, well, at least in this book, it's being treated as some message from the enemy, right? But what I was thinking about was all these, at least how it's understood these days, like all these impulses, they come from our unconsciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say if we use the same example for a hamburger, maybe if you got this sudden craving for a hamburger, maybe it means that your body needs something that contains exactly this hamburger just to keep you healthy and safe, you know. Maybe it's actually a useful thing, that because your body has to balance, and like our nature is made in such a way that it balances itself, you know. Like there is some sort of equilibrium, and maybe our unconsciousness, or if it gives us a sudden memory, maybe there is some root of the conflict that you're experiencing right now. But maybe it can be not exactly like a message from the enemy. Maybe sometimes it can be something more.
Well, maybe sometimes it is more, but then there are the ones that are the messages from the enemy, and so we have to discern. If it's a Friday night during Lent and you get a craving for a hamburger, it's from the enemy. It may be the case that your body is craving, you know, protein and grease and, you know, fat and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But you know better, you know, because you're not supposed to have a hamburger on Friday night during Lent.
Really, could it be a case of Mother Mary, as in you ask permission and get to help discern from your spiritual mother to help discern between these type of things in a situation like that?
Well, yeah, in a monastery you would go to the spiritual
If you have
father.
a desire, you go and say, can I do this?
Right.
And if you get a blessing, then go ahead. You've been blessed to do it. If not, then no. And then you don't have to worry about that.
Right, and and in a monastery you can do that.
Right.
In the world you can't do that. You know, you can't call up the priest and, you know, have the whole congregation calling up the priest. You know? There's some priests who want that. They want to control people's lives, but that's wrong. So, but I think everybody understands what the context of this is. So, I think there's a line, I don't remember where, it says that and sometimes humans can differ not at all from the demons, except that they're even more conceited and arrogant.
What do you mean? You mean the humans being more arrogant than the demons? Is that what you meant? Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah, we can. Humans can. We can.
Wow.
We also believe ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's very important to, humility is very important. And humility is not about bowing and scraping. Humility is about being honest about yourself. All the bowing and scraping gets tiresome. But real humility is just to be honest and to know that everything comes by the hand of God. It's all from God. Whether you live or die is from God. Whether you succeed or whether you fail is from God. And if we take everything as from God's providence, as from the hand of God, it helps us greatly to avoid arrogance, pride, and conceit.
In a gathering where I was, I noticed that an earnest brother was troubled by evil thoughts. As he could not find a suitable place for secret prayer, he went out as if compelled by natural necessity into the place set apart for that purpose.
I think it's 81, isn't it?
No,
Oh,
it is 82.
yeah.
You read 81.
Yeah.
He went as if compelled by natural necessity into the place set apart for that purpose, and there armed himself with vigorous prayer against the enemy. When I reproached him for choosing an indecent place, he replied, "In an unclean place I pray to drive away unclean thoughts in order to be cleansed of all impurity." All demons try to darken our mind, and they suggest what they want to. For as long as the mind does not shut its eyes, we shall not be robbed of our treasure. For the demon of fornication tries to do this much more than all the rest. Often after darkening our mind, which controls us, it urges and disposes of us in the presence of people to do what only those who are out of their mind do. Then later, when the mind becomes sober, we are ashamed of our unholy acts, words, and gestures, not only before those who saw us, but also before ourselves. And we are amazed at our previous blindness. Often as a result of such reflection, men have desisted from this evil. Banish the enemy when he hinders you from prayer, meditation, or vigil after you have committed sin. Remember him who said, "Yet because the soul tormented by the thought of previous sins gives me trouble, I will give her relief from her enemies." Who has conquered his body? He who has crushed his heart. And who has crushed his heart? He who has denied himself. For how can he not be crushed, who has died to his own will? For there is a passionate person more passionate than the passionate, and he will even confess his pollutions with pleasure and enjoyment. Unclean and shameful thoughts in the heart are generally produced by the deceiver of the heart, the demon of fornication. But temperance and disregard of them is the cure. I do not know by what habit and rule of life I can bind this friend of mine and judge him by the example of the other passions. For before I can bind him, he is let loose. Before I can condemn him, I am reconciled to him. Before I can punish him, I bend down and pity him. How can I hate him by whom I by nature habitually love? How can I get free of him with whom I am bound forever? How can I escape what will share my resurrection? How am I to make immortal what has received a mortal nature? What argument can I use to one who has the argument of nature on his side? If I bind him by fasting, by condemning my neighbor, I am handed over to him again. If, desisting from judgment, I overmaster him, then being proud of this, I am subjected to him again. For he is an ally and a foe, an assistant and a rival, a defender and a traitor. If I humor him, he attacks me. If I exhaust him, he gets feeble. When he is rested, he misbehaves himself. If I turn away in loathing, he cannot bear it. If I mortify him, I endanger myself. If I strike him down, I have nothing with which to obtain virtues. I embrace him and I turn away from him. What is this mystery in me? What is the meaning of this blending of body and soul? How am I constituted a friend and foe to myself? Tell me, my yoke fellow, my nature, for I shall not ask anyone else in order to learn about you. How am I to remain unwounded by you? How can I avoid the danger of my nature? For I have already made a vow to Christ to wage war against you. How am I to overcome your tyranny? For I am resolved to be your master. And the flesh might say in reply to its soul, I shall never tell you anything which you do not know equally well, but only of things of which we both have knowledge. I have my Father within me, self-love. The fire which I experience from without comes from humoring me and from general comfort. The fire which burns within comes from past deeds and bygone deeds. Having conceived, I give birth to sins, and they, when born, in turn beget death or despair. If you know the deep and obvious weakness which is in both you and me, you have bound my hands. If you starve your appetite, you have bound my feet from going further. If you take the yoke of obedience, you have thrown off my yoke. If you obtain humility, you have cut off my head. This is the 15th reward of victory. He who has received it while still living in the flesh has died and risen, and from now on experiences the foretaste of future immortality.
So, would all types of sexual immorality fall into the spirit of fornication, or is that?
You might imagine it as a whole herd of demons, each having his own specialty.
So I wonder, how did they combine these two ideas about our flesh being an enemy and at the same time believing that we all are going to be resurrected with a physical body?
Because there's a difference between the flesh and the body. The flesh specifically refers to the fallen, that kind of fallen carnality, which means a focus on the gratification of our carnal desires, of our physical desires. Whereas the body, which of course it refers to the same thing, the flesh, is not about, the carnal desires, but simply refers to the body itself. And so the whole point of dispassion is overcoming and cleansing ourselves of that carnality, of all of the both the actions as well as the thoughts that prevent the sanctification of our flesh, of our body. In other words, the idea is to sanctify the body. And the way we sanctify the body is by bringing our will into line, into synergy, into cooperation with the divine will. And that, one aspect of that is purity. It's profound purity. And so by attaining to this profound purity and dispassion, the body is sanctified by the indwelling grace of the Holy Spirit.
But wasn't the physical body thought to be like the root of our desires and passions?
Well, it's actually, in a sense, more the spirit of carnality.
Because this goes back to the Garden of Eden. I mean, God created
that's what
humans.
I was thinking.
I mean, we were originally perfect and we fell. So I think.
But, one of the things I think that's really important is human nature is human nature, whether in a fallen state or an unfallen state. It's still human nature. In other words, it's just the mode in which it exists. But it's not like there's a human nature before the fall and a human nature after the fall. And quite frankly, we don't know what human nature before the fall was. There's all sorts of ideas about it. Everything from Origen's idea that human beings were created as spiritual angelic noetic beings, which were spherical in form. And that's essentially a Gnostic idea. That human beings were like completely transfigured in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve before the fall, and they lost that and fell into mortality. And so there's all sorts of different ideas of that. It's in the realm of mythology, not in the sense of these are fake stories, but rather it's a way of expressing the truth about something that you can't rationally describe. It's a way of describing a mystery.
If I heard it right, what did it mean when he said this is the 15th reward of victory?
It's the 15th step in the ladder.
Okay, thank you.
So if you're climbing the ladder, in other words, you're going step by step by step, and you're
Okay.
checking off the boxes. And this is number 15.
Okay.
I think strong call it. You run to achieve is another victory because it's not when you slip and fall off the ladder.
Right.
If you successfully were able to step on it and push yourself upward, you didn't fall off, so therefore it's a victory.
Mm-hmm.
It's like climbing a glacier wall. You know, if you're able to make get the next square, fold into the ice and pull yourself up, that's a victory. Each step forward is a victory.
So what else? Anything else in this?
So does it mean that for human nature to stay like real human, there should be a possibility for a fall?
Well, in this world, yes. In the world to come, we don't fall. It's beyond that.
It's difficult to comprehend the...
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would we still retain our free? I mean, I'm assuming that we would still retain our free will, though, right?
Right.
So, could you kind of, I guess, elaborate on that, kind of explain that? Because you said we won't fall, but I mean,
Well, it's like the angels. The angels don't fall, or even can't fall. There are those that did, and that was that.
Once you've made your decision.
And so-
you've made your decision.
What's this?
Once you've made your decision, you've
Yeah.
made your decision.
Right.
It's like
So you have that free will to make that decision, but that's,
You're
it's like, why would you want to
You're
do
making
that?
your choice now.
It's like a pot after it's been shaped and put in the kiln and baked. It doesn't change its form after that.
No.
It either stays in the form that it was shaped in or it shatters.
Yeah.
There's no other option. And I think in that sense, that's kind of like the case of the angels. They don't fall because those that did were shattered essentially, and they can't regain. You can't put a pot back together.
Right.
And it doesn't work. It's in a nature of unchangingness because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have that malleability that humans do.
Mm-hmm.
So it mentioned on 81 the bodily prayers, the stretching out of hands, beating the breast, sensing the raising of eyes to heaven,
Mm-hmm.
deep sighing and frequent prostration. Is that not a common form of prayer anymore, only for a extreme situation?
It's what people do all sorts of things privately, and that kind of thing would be done, and absolutely privately, and for nobody, so that nobody would see it. But yeah, the people would do that.
Western Christians, during the general confession,
Yeah. Yeah.
all in unison 3 times.
Uh-huh. There was one guy that I knew. He was a Ukrainian priest from Canada. He would make the sign of the cross like this. And so all during the service, you'd be hearing. It was quite funny.
I find when he was describing the relationship with the body, so he talks about if I exhaust him, he gets feeble. When he is rested, he misbehaves himself. Is that kind of like one of the reasons why they do a lot of heavy labor in the monasteries, like making work?
Let's see, where is that?
88. Unless I'm looking at this wrong, but
78?
88.
88.
Yeah. In the middle.
You know, you know, if I humor him, he attacks me. If I exhaust him, he gets feeble. When he's rested, he misbehaves himself.
Well, yeah, it's talking about the body.
Yeah,
So when you get exhausted, you get feeble, right?
Yeah, but I was just thinking that if, in relation to like the body's tendency towards like the flesh leading you to sin, if it's exhausted, it's harder to fall into that.
Right.
So,
And so in the monasteries, for example, that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of heavy work. You keep them busy all day and half the night. So, and actually, in the women's monasteries, at least in Russia, they work harder than in men's monasteries. I had a friend who, very interesting lady. She was a world-class ophthalmologist in Moscow. She was one of the people who invented the LASIK procedure, although she refused to have it. She was very pious, had been grown up in the catacomb church, which is very strict, very, very, very strict, and very intense. And so she went to join Shamordino, which is the women's monastery attached to Optina, served by the fathers of Optina. And when she entered the monastery, it was all nice and good. And then she spent 1.5 years in the kitchen.
yes.
She never left the kitchen. No services, no nothing. Kitchen. Others spend, and then she left because she couldn't stand that. Others, it's off to the field. And you never leave the field. No services, no nothing. You just. So the men's monasteries, they would never tolerate that. The women's monasteries, oh, those ladies.
Seems kind of bad, honestly. No
What's that?
services at all. No community.
All the services were all going on, but it was the under obedience. You know, these women, you know, these nuns had to, prepare the meals because there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people for every meal. So, had another friend who was I was teaching at St. Tikhon University in Moscow in the English program, and this guy was he was somewhere between his theology. He was not quite a seminarian, but a theology student, and he decided to go to Optina Monastery, which one of the great spiritual centers, right? For Holy Week. And they looked him up and down and said, nice, strong young boy. Come this way. He hauled bricks all week. No services. He hauled bricks. The only consolation was many of the monks were there working right alongside. So.
I guess that's what's really necessary for a lot of people these days, just to get immersed into some sort of exhausting activity, just to clear up their mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, in our culture, how many of us do heavy physical work?
It's something to most people.
Yeah. So, let's read through 16 and 17. They're very short.
Step 16, on love of money or avarice. Many learned teachers treat next, after the tyrant just described, the thousand-headed demon of avarice. We, unlearned as we are, did not wish to change the order of the learned, and we have therefore followed the same convention and rule. So let us first say a little about the disease, and then speak briefly about the remedy. Avarice, or love of money, is the worship of idols, a daughter of unbelief, an excuse for infirmities, a foreboder of old age, a harbinger of drought, and a herald of hunger. The lover of money sneers at the gospel and is a willful transgressor. He who has attained to love scatters his money. He who says that he lives for love and for money has deceived himself. He who mourns for himself has also renounced his body. At the appropriate time, he does not spare it. Do not say that you are collecting money for the poor. With 2 mites, the kingdom was purchased. A hospitable man and a money lover met one another, and the latter called the former unintelligible. He who has conquered this passion has cut out care, but he who is bound by it never attains to pure prayer. The beginning of love of money is the pretext of almsgiving, and the end of it is hatred of the poor. So long as he is collecting, he is charitable, but when the money is in hand, he tightens his hold. I have seen how men of scanty means enrich themselves by living with the poor in spirit, and forgot their first poverty. A monk who loves money is a stranger to idleness, and hourly remembers the word of the apostle, "Let an idle man not eat," and "These hands of mine have ministered to me, and to those who were with me." This is the 16th struggle. He who has won this victory has either obtained love or cut out care.
Okay, the next chapter is related.
Step 17, on poverty that hastens heavenwards. Poverty is the resignation of cares, life without anxiety, an unencumbered traveler, alienation from sorrow, and fidelity to the commandments. A poor monk is lord of the world. He has entrusted his cares to God, and by faith has obtained all men as his slaves. He will not tell his need to man, and he receives what comes to him as from the hand of the Lord. The poor ascetic is a son of detachment, and thinks of what he has as if it were nothing. When he becomes a solitary, he regards everything as refuse. But if he worries about something, he has not yet become poor. A poor man is pure during prayer, but an acquisitive man prays to material images. Those who live in obedience are strangers to love of money. For where even the body has been given up, what is left to be one's own? Only in one way can they do wrong, namely by being ready and quick to go from place to place. I have seen material possessions make monks patient to remain in one place, but I praise those who are pilgrims of the Lord. He who has tasted the things on high easily despises what is below, but he who has not tasted the things above finds joy in possessions. A man who impoverishes himself for no reason suffers a double harm. He abstains from present goods and is deprived of future ones. Let us monks, then, be as trustful as the birds are, for they do not have cares, and they do not collect. Great is he who piously renounces possessions, but holy is he who renounces his will. The one will receive 100-fold, either in money or in graces, but the other will inherit eternal life. Waves never leave the sea, nor do anger and grief leave the avaricious. He who despises what is material is rid of quarrels and controversies, but the covetous man will fight till death for a needle. Unwavering faith cuts off cares, and remembrance of death denies the body as well. In Job there was no trace of avarice, therefore when he lost everything, he remained undisturbed. The love of money is, and is called, the root of all evils, because it produces hatred, thefts, envy, separations, enmities, storms, remembrance of wrong, hard-heartedness, and murders. Some have burned much wood with a small fire, and with the help of one virtue some have escaped all the passions just mentioned. This virtue is called detachment, and is born of experience and a taste of God, and meditation on the account to be given at death. The attentive reader will remember the history of the mother of all evil. When she enumerated her wicked and cursed children, she said that her second offspring was the stone of insensibility. but the many-headed snake of idolatry prevented me from giving it its own special place. I do not know why, but the discerning fathers gave it the third place in the chain of the 8 deadly sins. Having said sufficient about avarice, we now intend to speak about insensibility as the third infirmity, though the second born. And after this we shall treat briefly of sleep and watchfulness, and also of puerile and cowardly fear, for these are the failings of beginners. This is the 17th step. He who is mounted is journeying to heaven, stripped of material things. What is the history of the mother of all evil?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, the final verse.
16.
16. The attentive reader will remember the history of the mother of all evil.
Greed, I think. Right?
When she enumerated her. Oh, is it a previous
Is
step?
it talking about like the devil and
Well,
the 8 deadly sins?
no, it's the demon of fornication.
Oh, okay. Forgot she was female.
Or maybe it's the demon of idolatry. It's a demon. In this translation, well, in that one they use poverty. This uses non-possessiveness, and there's quite a distinction. One can be poor and lust for possessions and money, but if you're non-possessive or non-acquisitive, then means you're free from the desire for money and for things. And this, of course, is very, very important in the monastic life, because it's in monasticism you certainly can't acquire possessions. And what you do acquire, you're the steward of, but you quickly find that you don't own them; they own you. But the love of possessions really becomes a kind of idolatry. And so one of the key vows in monasticism, poverty, chastity, obedience. Poverty is the vow of non-acquisitiveness. Chastity, obviously, but really the word chastity means integrity, and obedience. Well, and there's a fourth one as well, stability. But non-acquisitiveness is a very, very important part of that, and as a spiritual discipline. And the identification with the poor and compassion for the poor, as well as not holding on to, as well as detachment from all material possessions. It's the ideal.
So on the step 16, verse number 10, it was a little bit confusing to me because it says, "A monk who loves money is a stranger to idleness, and hourly remembers the word of the apostle. Let an idle man not eat." Isn't it a good thing for a monk not to be idle?
Okay. A monk who loves money is a stranger to despondency, to acedia. Okay. And hourly remembers the word of the apostle, let an idle man not eat. In other words, a monk who loves money is always going to be busy trying to make money. And so he likes to take that word of the apostle as a justification and saying, yes, it's no good, that if you don't work, you shall not eat. And so he works.
Could it
Yeah.
also be that could it also be that you'd be afflicted by gluttony as well? Isn't it a lust for eating as well? So,
Yeah, this is specifically in relation to avarice, but,
well, but it is, you need money in order to eat. Like, you need to buy the food.
yeah.
So you love money because you also love eating. Is essentially what I was. So because if you didn't love eating, then you wouldn't really have a need for money.
Well, all the sins can kind of combine together, I would think.
What's that?
Like all the sins, you can have more than one.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
You can have avarice and gluttony at the same time, and it could feed off of each other.
Right.
Right, and so actually usually what it gets associated with in the literature is the desire to give hospitality. And the gluttony is all about giving hospitality.
Right.
And so you have to work in order to give charity and hospitality, which also is a means of gratifying yourself.
Is there any justification for that love of money if you're using that money to give? If you know, you're taking that and then you're giving us either a certain amount or whether it be charity or...
Well, if you're a monk, if you're a monk, it's one thing. If you're in the world, if you're a layman, then we're called to work and to give.
Yeah.
You know, actually, a monk is technically exempt from having to give charity because he has nothing himself. Or he's a member of a community, and it's the community that gives to the poor, and not the individual monks, because monks don't have any.
Using, I guess, piggybacking off of that, using avarice as a means to give to the poor, isn't that basically what happened to Judas?
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of mad that they were using the oil for Christ and not the poor, and he ended up
Right?
Because he was in charge.
Yeah.
And he was in charge of the money bags.
Yeah. So that's what that reminded me of.
And there's also, I think, like a pride in that, especially you talk about hospitality, especially in the ancient world, hospitality was something like that you were supposed to do. It was a huge thing. And so someone who was very known to be hospitable, have a certain sort of
Ego.
you might being, praised for your hospitality. People might like that.
It's like that in Italy, the family one.
Yeah.
Our cousins just threw this huge feast.
Yeah. Cousins I didn't even know.
Yeah.
I randomly showed up and they fed me food.
Yeah. Last common ancestor, 150 years ago. But
Cousins you don't know from an ancestor that's like several, like 5 or 6 generations back. That's called a clan.
Yeah.
So one of the greatest examples of hospitality that I know of, it was very common and probably still isn't. You go to some rural village in Russia and some babushka will invite you into her house and she'll put, lay out a spread. But eventually you realize that was all the food she had for the month. And yet she freely shares it.